It would appear we have another video unrelated to my Tolkien speedrun. My first Wheel of Time video to take up my time. Is that funny by any chance? Or am I trying too hard? Now, this has nothing to do with the Wheel of Time lore. I'll be diving into that after my speedrun. But I had to talk about this because it's to do with the casting choices that have recently been announced for some of the main characters for the Wheel of Time series. I'm afraid it's also to do with controversy in relation to those casting choices. And I want to give my humble and personal view on the matter. Now, I'm going to be tackling a delicate issue here, so please bear with me. Now, that issue is racial diversity in film and TV. This is never easy to talk about, so I hope I'm not treading on thin ice. But first, let me tell you a story. Oh, and by the way, minor spoilers for the first couple of chapters of the first book. If that really matters to you, I'm afraid you've got a long way to go, bud. This is a story that makes absolutely no sense. I call it the story that makes absolutely no sense. It is set in a time kind of socially equivalent to the Middle Ages, like many fantasy stories before it. It is set in a place called Emond's Field in the Two Rivers. If you can spot it on the map, then points to you. Randall Thor. He was a head taller than anyone else in the district. Grey eyes and reddish tinge to his hair came from his mother. She had been an outsider. He had explored into the sandhills once, even to the foot of the Mountains of Mist. Him and his closest friends, Matt Cawthorn and Perrin Ibarra. A lot further afield than most people in Emond's Field ever went. To them, a journey to the next village was a big event. The Westwood, in plain sight of Emond's Field, only the hardiest men farmed in the Westwood. The Congars and the Coplins, the two families were so intermarried, no one knew where one and the other began. Like most Two Rivers folk, Rand had a stubborn streak. Outsiders said it was the prime trait in the Two Rivers that they could give mules lessons and teach stones. Outsiders found it funny that the road had one name to the north, another to the south. It was good enough for Two Rivers people. Unmarried women would dance the pole. Unmarried men sang. It was an excuse to sing and dance, I bet it was. Nobody in Two Rivers needed much excuse for that. And, if rumours could be believed, a grand display of fireworks was planned. It had been 10 years since the last display, and that was still talked about. Matt Cawthorn crouched behind the cart. Hello, Mirrors. Matt's brown eyes twinkled with mischief as usual. You like to get in the way, don't you? We have strangers in the Two Rivers last evening. What would the Shepherd of the Night be doing in the Two Rivers? Watching farm boys? Dad thinks he's a sheep stealer or a chicken thief. Rand could remember only 2 gleemen coming into the Two Rivers in his whole life. Emond's Field would be talking about this festival for 10 years off. Worry was not uncommon for the village council these days. not in Emmonsfield. Who knew what Tarrant Ferry folk thought about anything? Many of the wine barrels were marked with chalk in Branal Veer's hand, what peddler had brought them, and in which city they had been made. Have you seen this? This is what I've got to work with. Bloody cats. So cute. Peddlers and even merchants sometimes brought brandy or ale from outside, but it was never as good and cost the earth. The stranger's, his cloak is green or maybe grey. It changes. It seems to fade into wherever he's standing. Hers is blue, like the sky, and 10 times fancier than any clothes I ever saw. She's a high-born lady, like in the stories. I never saw horses so tall or sleek. They look like they could run forever. I think he works for her. A soldier maybe. The way he wears his sword, it's a part of him, like his hand or foot. It makes the merchant guards look like cur dogs. And her Rand, I never imagined anyone like her. She's out of a Gleeman story. Except the merchants once a year to buy tobacco and wool, and the peddlers, outsiders never came into the Two Rivers, not this far south, and it was a good 5 years since. Look at this. Bloody typical. Are you enjoying this? Sorry, that was the story. I never saw horses so tall or sleek. They look like they could run forever. I think he works for her. A soldier maybe. The way he wears his sword, I've already read this, haven't I? Good, no, Gleeman story. Except for merchants once a year to buy tobacco and wool, and the peddlers, outsiders, never came into the Two Rivers, not this far south. It was a good 5 years since the last time a real stranger appeared in Emmonsfield, and he had been trying to hide from trouble in Boulogne. He had not stayed long. This had to be the Lady Lorraine, and she was everything and more. At first he thought she was as young as Nineveh, but the longer he looked, the more he thought she was older than that. There was a maturity about her. Large dark eyes, she held herself with grace and air of command that made him feel awkward. She was barely tall enough to come up to his chest, but her presence was such that her height seemed the proper one, and he felt ungainly in his tallness. He had never seen a grown woman with her hair upbraided. Every girl at the Two Rivers waited eagerly to be of age to wear a braid. No one like you has ever come to Emmonsfield before. It's just that no one comes into the Two Rivers except the merchants and the peddlers. The merchant guards sometimes say this is the back end of forever. As she left, a tall man Ran had not noticed before moved away from the front of the inn and followed her, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He almost seemed to disappear at times. His hair was long and grey at the temples. That face was made from stony planes and angles, weathered but unlined. When he moved, Ran could think of nothing but a wolf. That was Lan. I bet he's a warder. Don't be a fool. Warders are just from stories. Anyway, warders have swords and armour covered in gold and jewels and spend all their time in the great light, fighting evil and trollocs and such. Do we have trollocs in the Two Rivers? We have sheep. Perrin Ibarra shouted at Rand over the clamour. Half a head shorter than Rand, the curly-haired blacksmith's apprentice was so stocky as to seem a man and a half wide, with arms and shoulders thick enough to rival those of Master Lurhan himself. Why are they having a war? Vane grinned, and Rand had the feeling he was mocking the villagers' isolation from the world and mocking their ignorance. Nineveh al-Mir stepped into the huddle. The dark braid pulled over her shoulder, almost bristling with anger. Slender and barely taller than Mat's shoulder, at the moment the wisdom seemed taller than any of them, and it did not matter that she was young and pretty. Egwene stood a few paces behind the wisdom, watching intently. Of a height with Nineveh, and with the same dark colouring, arms crossed beneath her breast, mouth tight with disapproval, her big brown eyes held no laughter now. Here's a quick video showing the actors they've chosen to play the roles they've cast currently. So what's the point of this nonsensical story? Well, despite the story having no structure, there are still certain things that obviously stand out. The first and the clearest is that in this fantasy world of the Wheel of Time, which has a technology similar to that of the Middle Ages, as many fantasy stories do, the two rivers and Emond's Field are considered to be completely in the middle of nowhere. A small farming village, rarely visited by anyone, and about as insignificant as you can get. That is made clear again and again and again. Next thing that is also made clear is the fact that Randall Thor, who is going to be the main character of the Wheel of Time, he is often picked out in the early chapters for the fact that he has features that make him stand out, that he doesn't quite look like everyone else in the village. And the reason for this is that his mother is, and this is the word the book uses, his mother is an outsider. I mean, just the fact that you use the term outsider shows how rare people come through your village, and you know, how strange an occurrence it would be. He is taller than everyone else in the descriptions, and with grey eyes and ginger hair. Everyone else in the village has a similar look. Dark hair, dark eyes, and not short, but shorter than Rand. Now this is not nitpicking, this is a big deal because it fits in with the story. A village in the middle of absolute nowhere is not going to be the cosmopolitan and multicultural towns that we have today. not in that time. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with the entire village being played by people of African American descent, because that fits in with the source material. And what could have been really interesting is if the main character was played by someone of mixed race, because it would have shown how much cooler the people back then in the fantasy medieval setting were compared to the people of the real medieval setting. I mean, interracial couples in the Middle Ages, that and people being okay with that would have been pretty bloody cool. I mean, you know, there's some arseholes who are still against that kind of thing now, but I mean, in the medieval time, it very rarely would have happened, if ever. But it would have really, shown our culture up if in this fantasy world set in a sort of medievally town, that they would have been cool with interracial marriage. And by the way, I'm not actually sure if medievally is a word, but if it isn't a word, I am now coining it. I have created the word medievally. Now, despite everything I've just been talking about, I'm not actually someone who cares that much if a story strays away from its source material when it's made for the screen. So then what's my quibble? I do care that the casting has to make sense. 5 of the 6 main characters cast so far all come from the same village, in the middle of nowhere, in these medievally fantasy settings. This is not a cosmopolitan city of the modern day. This is a medievally fantasy. This is not a cosmopolitan city of the modern day. This is a medievally fantasy setting. You know, a place with swords and stuff. Plus, it's not as if the source material doesn't provide the possible opportunity for a multicultural cast. There are 14 books. There are 2,782 named characters. And I know that to be an absolute empirical fact because I read it on Wikipedia. So we're meant to believe that in this Two Rivers place, this tiny little village, there are 3 African Americans in our party and 3 white people. That is just no. Oh, and by the way, the dude who's playing Perrin, he's really going to need to bulk up if he wants to get into that role, because he is described as having the muscles that make him 1.5 men wide. So he's going to have to get down to the gym a fair bit. I now have this image in my head of the actor playing Perrin with 2 giant CGI arms just attached to him in a sort of Tekken or old school fighting game fashion. That would be pretty cool. Anyway, that is all really. Moiraine is the only one I've not talked about. She's got no problem with her casting. I mean, she's a fine choice with her Aryan features. That is a joke. That is 100% a joke. I am not a Nazi. I have never been a Nazi. I did not plan on becoming a Nazi in the future. Joke. But yeah, she was cast quite a while ago, and I've not got any problem with her casting choice whatsoever. So yeah. Well, that's it on the casting. On the Wheel of Time side of the channel, there will be lore videos coming out just as soon as I've finished this speed run of this 30,000 year Tolkien history, which is ain't half taking a bloody long time, I'll tell you that. Oh, and I have some news that's really exciting, but I will show you in the next video when it is complete. But that's all from me today. I bid you farewell. This has been your humble narrator, who is now signing off. Bye-bye.